Welcome to the Crazy Cool Family Podcast with Don and Suzanne Manning. Parents, what if we could give you the power to transform your family into something absolutely amazing?
A family where everyone is healthy, gets along, loves Jesus, and has great purpose in life.
Hey, let us flip your thinking to unlock the power God has given you to create your own Crazy Cool family. Hello, parents, and welcome to the Crazy Cool Family Podcast. Don Manning. I don't have Suzanne here today. Instead, I have a very special guest, one of my dear friends for many, many years, the defensive tackle for the Super Bowl champion Dallas Cowboys. In what year did y'all win the Super Bowl?
We won in 92, 93, and 95.
Yes, man.
3 out of 4.
You were in there for the glory days. And,
glory days. Bruce Springsteen song. Yeah, glory days.
Chad Hennings, ladies and gentlemen. We're so excited he's here. And we're not going to talk football. We're going to talk family like we do with Crazy Cool Family. Today, I've invited Chad on. He has an incredible story. And I guess, Chad, before we get into that story, I want to kind of frame the podcast a little bit, but just tell us a little bit about your family, where you are, how long you've been married. You got 2 kids. Tell us about that.
Married 32 years. Tammy and I got married when I finished pilot training in the Air Force. 32 years. Wow. 2 kids, Chase and Brenna.
What are their ages?
They're 28, 25.
Yeah.
Chase will soon be 29 here shortly. Yeah. But our kids went to school together. I was your assistant basketball coach for our daughter's rec league basketball team back in the day.
Something's wrong with that one.
Yeah. But we've, our background, when Tammy and I were married, we were in the Air Force for 4 years, and we went and played for the Dallas Cowboys for 9 years, stayed in the North Texas region, have been here for for 30 years, since 1992.
Now you're in the real estate business and you have your Wingman Ministries. Just a little shout out on that.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, that's, and our whole thing is, the tent making skills of the real estate business, but my passion is men's ministry and discipleship, and that's what we do at Wingman.
Yeah, and does it well. So what's the website on that? We'll get it.
Just wingmen.org.
Wingmen, M-E-N.
M-E-N.
.org.
Yep.
Yeah, so we'll do that at the end as well, but just wanted to put a shout out there for that. So let me frame this podcast a little bit, because parents, I think you're going to absolutely get a lot out of this. And so Chad and Tammy, through Chase has had, I don't know.
I would say
an autoimmune disease. Is that illness? And so that put him in a wheelchair basically, and severely restricted his joint movement, things like that. I'll let Chad go into that a little bit, but what I want to do, a lot of times when we have these types of issues, we focus on the issue. Oh, how did we, overcome this physical? But what I want to frame for you, parents, is that we all face major issues in our parenting journey with our kids. And it may be with our marriage. It could be that we have a kid with a learning disability, or we could have 2 siblings that fight all the time, or we may have this relationship problem, or it could be a physical issue like Chad's going to talk about. But I want to explore today with Chad. Now, you said that Chad's 20, that Chase is 28 and Brenna's 25. So, oh my goodness. I remember Brenna when she was just a little 6th grade girl. Yeah. But anyway, so now they are 2 healthy kids. Marriage is good. You're at the, towards the end of the game here of the raising your kids, how to get there and stuff like that. So let's just explore first, what happened with Chase.
Well, I'll just to allude to your point about marriage. It was work. It was a battle.
Right.
We battled every day. To kind of set the story up about Chase, I think it's good that we kind of set some context regarding the marriage eventually, which led, when Chase ultimately got sick. Tammy and I were married, as I said, 1990. First 2 years of our marriage, I was deployed overseas, flying missions in the Air Force. Would readily deploy. I flew the A-10 Warthog to Germany, to Western Europe, a week out of every month, and then the Gulf War kicks off. Mm-hmm. So I'm gone 2-3 month stints, 6 months. So our first 2 years of our marriage, I'm gone half the time.
Oh wow!
So we had a long distance relationship going up to that. We'd see each other once a month while I was going through pilot training, learning to fly jets, etc. So we never really got a chance to know each other. And even when we were first 2 years of marriage,
were y'all high school sweethearts?
No, we met right before I graduated from the Air Force Academy.
Okay,
it was literally it was truly love at first sight. It was one of those truly God things. But our armed forces went through reduction in force, which they waived my pilot training commitment, my service academy commitment, not just for me, but across the board, which then allowed me to go play for the Dallas Cowboys. Now you talk about those stressors, moving from a foreign country, changing jobs, trying to make my way on the Dallas Cowboys. Again, I'm going through training camp, et cetera.
Where does Chase come into the picture?
Well, I'll get to this here. We had just won our 3rd Super Bowl in 4 years. And no, I'll take that back. Yeah, we had just won our 3rd Super Bowl in 4 years. Chase was 2.5. We had him after the first Super Bowl. And we're riding high. Super Bowl win. It was a very good time in our lives. And then Chase ended up having one of his childhood immunizations, and he ended up having a reaction to the immunization, which caused his body to have this autoimmune reaction. And ultimately, it tanked where literally 4 weeks after we've won the Super Bowl, he gets sick.
Oh, wow.
And we go from this high to this time of uncertainty.
And what does sick look like? How do you recognize that?
Well, sick looked like at the first point in time, it was high fevers, rash. It ultimately continued on for days, for weeks. We ended up spending a week in the hospital, poked and prodded, trying to discern what this is going on. We were released with what they diagnosed as a fever of an unknown origin. They didn't know what was going on. So we had all this uncertainty. And I'm trying to continue down my workouts with getting back because we have the month of February off. This is when he got sick. So I'm going back first part of March, starting to work out, getting back into the groove. And we're going to see doctors. Tammy's shuttling him back and forth. And without, belaboring it too a lot of the background, because we want to get into the parenting piece here, but Don, this continued for years.
Yeah.
There were times where, and I'm saying this from my perspective.
Continued for years, what is that? Doctor's visit, but what's he doing?
Chase continued to get worse and worse and worse. Inflammation in his body. Ended up, the medical diagnosis was systemic juvenile rheumatoid arthritis.
So he's in pain.
Extreme amount of pain.
Right.
Extreme, where he couldn't even have a sheet laid on his body in bed. Yeah. Inflammation. Then his body got very emaciated. If you've looked at pictures of Holocaust survivors out of Auschwitz, out of Birkenau, wherever, he looked like he was a Holocaust survivor. That's how emaciated he got. And we traveled all over the country looking. This is not just weeks, months. This is years. Yes. This is throughout my whole career. Then for the next 5 years with the Cowboys, and then some. And we can get into a lot of this, and we can take this many different directions. But Tammy and I, the one thing that we did is we made a commitment that, hey, we're going to stick together. Because we knew the statistics of parents that either had a death of a child or a severe illness of a child. Divorce rates are way north of the norm, of the average. Yeah. And we made a commitment. And then for me personally, talking spiritually, and we can take this, again, many different directions, is I came to the point you alluded that now when my son's 5, 6 years old, 7 years old, he's gradually got worse to the point where he could walk, but then it'd get painful for him to walk, and he ended up being in a wheelchair. You're talking about a guy I'm a type A, former fighter pilot, former football player. I can do it all. Yeah. And now my son can't do anything basically physically. He can't play. He wants to play sports so bad, and it's breaking my heart. Right. And I'm sitting here questioning God, who are you to allow this to happen to an innocent child? That I cried out, God, help me. I want to know who you are. How can this happen? And it was just that through the Holy Spirit over many years, and it wasn't a snap of your fingers, but it was just the revelation to us of who he is, that he loved Chase more than Tammy or I could ever do.
Is that. Tammy how's Tammy responding to all this?
See,
because she's having to go to those doctor's visits, and and now you have Brenna coming on. So you got Brenna, there's 3 years in age. So we got an infant going through all the toddler and everything going through with Brenna as well. From
my perspective, coming from that male background, I had to put my head down. You're in that fight or flight. We're in a continue fight mechanism. Get very myopic. You compartmentalize. For me, I had to put a lot of motion aside that I had to execute. because I still, having to compete at a high level on the football field.
Right.
And how do you come home and see your son agonizing in pain, where you're having to make decisions, financial decisions on your family, be there for your wife? And I wasn't there emotionally, I don't think, for her. We struggled with that. We had to figure it out because I'm trying to survive myself. Right. Yeah. She's doing the same thing. As God created men and women differently, she's more emotional. She takes on the burden of her child. This is her baby, and she's hauling him all over. We were in survival mode. Nothing is working. We did not have any good news. Yeah, there were times of reprieve where he would be a little better, but we rejoiced just in his ability if he could make it to school that day without being in pain. And then, we learned a lot from Chase just with the tenacity, his grit, his determination, where he wanted to be there with his friends. And I'm sitting here thinking, I've been through training camp. I've been through basic training. I've flown missions in combat, but nothing compared to the grit and determination that he did.
Every day he's got to deal
every
with
day.
it.
Every day.
Yeah.
So it's...
And so I think it's interesting to explore a little bit, because so often, like you're saying, that when there's issues with our children, it affects our marriage. And it affects two things. One, our relationship with God. It also affects our marriage. And it even affects our sense of worth and our identity ourselves. And so as you guys are walking through that, tell me a little bit about how, you said you kind of suppressed some of that emotion because if and you were more focused, the type A is trying to fix everything. She's more emotional. What's that doing to your relationship with God and to your relationship with each other?
A lot of it, we were seeking healing from God. We were just seeking, something that, God, you can fix this. And we went through the whole theological range of traditional liturgical churches to charismatic churches, just trying to seek answers and who God is as our Creator and our Heavenly Father. And we've been through the gamut, and we've learned through trial and error, I guess, and through God revealing to us, who He truly is and what it means, to live a life in His kingdom today. So, that relationship, we were always strong.
Was there like a breakthrough moment that you had that? I mean, or, I think parents are, in the middle of things are always going, where am I? Who am I? All that. Or was it just it's one day you look up and over time you had know more of who God is? Or was there,
I think it came to a point where somebody had revealed to us, it's like, okay, who are we seeking? Are we seeking God for just the miracle, or are we seeking God for who God is in spite? Because you read through Jonah, you read through different examples of the Bible of persecution. And, John 16:33, in this world you will have trial, tribulation, troubles, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. In the midst of all this stress, that we're not to live in fear, we're not to be anxious. And that's where, unless you've gone through it, I can preach to you all and to my kids and to others all day long of how to deal with stress and anxiety. But until you go through it, and you have to be able to deal with it, how you deal with it, because stress is needful. We all need stress in our lives, but how you deal with stress, how much of that burden do you carry? How much do you give to Him? And I got to the point for myself personally, and I think Tammy too, is where it said, God, I can't do it. You have to take this burden off of me.
Right.
It may not relieving the burden, like Paul, remove the thorn from my side. I prayed it 3 times, but he said, my grace is sufficient for you. Yeah. I came to kind of to that point where, hey,
my
God.
My power is made perfect in weakness.
In weakness.
Remember that? Yeah.
In weakness.
Yeah.
And that's where I, changed my perspective on my goals, my aspirations, what I thought I wanted for my children. I wanted my son to be the football player, to follow my footsteps, be a fighter pilot, do those things where we couldn't. Now he had to look for other aspirations. Okay, who'd you create Chase to be? I know, God, it wasn't your will per se that Chase is sick and that he has to go through this. But all things can work for the good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose.
Yeah, I think that's, is there a time you can remember? I think this is so cool because I think that, okay, in this case, Chase had an autoimmune disorder that caused this or whatever, but so often, our kids don't live up to, quote unquote, live up to our expectations. We want, in this case, you wanted to be a fighter pilot, you wanted to be a football player, you wanted to be an athlete, whatever those things are. But at some point you go, you know what? That's not who God made my kid to be. Was there a point in time that you said that was a big revelation for you, or did just over time, how did you come to that realization? Because what you just said was, I had to figure out what was best for Chase. How did you come to that conclusion?
And it was one of those things is that I couldn't control the outcome.
Right.
This was the first thing in my life, based on my abilities, I couldn't control an outcome. But the one thing that I could control is who Chase is, his character, his integrity,
right,
his identity.
Right.
The filter in which he views the world. For me, that's, living quote unquote excellence is just that, your identity, plus living every day to be your best self through your character, your integrity, being humble, being courageous, listening to others, being truthful, being honest. Mm-hmm. Those things I can teach.
Right.
And whatever he does, it doesn't matter what you do.
Is the pain as he gets older? Is the pain starting to get less?
Pain is less. So
you're trying to figure that, and you start to find treatments. So as let's say he's 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. You're teaching him the character. I get that, but also, what interest did you find? How did you adjust from my kid's not going to be an athlete to what did he get interested in?
Well, that's what just it. I would try to meet him where he is at, whether that was being video games. I'm not a video gamer, but
right.
He started to get into video games. He started to he wanted the fishing.
Yeah.
We got into guns, marksmanship. Chase is a heck of a shot.
Really?
So we started to get into stuff like that. And it was just,
how'd you figure out what it was that he wanted to do? Well,
just ask him. Saw where his interests lie. What do you like?
But I want to stop down there for a second, because so often as parents, there's two things you've said that I want to just make sure that everyone hears is that one, you focused on his character, even though he may not have been, because of the disease, he may not have been everything from a physical standpoint. We can always go back to the character. And also, how do you figure out what your kid likes? You just said you just ask him. And you started, and you said it flippantly almost that it was easy, but that's not easy for everybody. And and so it wasn't flippantly, but it was more it was we just ask, and it seems simple, but it's not. You were going through a lot there to figure out how to connect with your child.
Yeah, and call it a God thing. And that was the one thing that I think that, looking back, that we are so grateful for, is that we spent the time with our kids having conversations over the dinner table, over the breakfast table, over just eating, where they would hear Tammy and I talk about world events, politics,
right,
theology, just issues, working out our own issues
right,
as a husband and
your
a wife.
Relationship with God.
We were totally transparent with them. They would see that, and then we would engage them into the conversation. What do you think?
Right.
And that's, Tammy and I, we came to the realization that our jobs as parents aren't to fix every kid's issue. Our job as parents are to raise independent,
right,
critical thinking adults that love the Lord.
You guys should have written a book, Crazy Cool Family.
I know. This is why this is that sacred echo, Don, and I appreciate what you and Suzanne do in your ministry, is because you're right. We do take a lot of things for granted that, we go through, but it's not rocket science, but it's not obvious to everybody.
Well, and it feels like, in terms of a football analogy, I tell dads all the time, especially, it's blocking and tackling. You're just every day at that dinner table. Your purpose is, so often our purpose at the dinner table is to lecture our kids, or to tell them what they're doing wrong, or to worry about them, or whatever it is. It sounds like your dinner table was, hey, let's share our lives together, and what do you think about that? Right?
Yeah. And that's where the parenting, it's not that 1 hour lecture that you give once a week. To your point, it's right, the mundane. It's the everyday, it's the grind. And it's just living the life. That's what makes the difference. And isn't that the Christian walk?
Right.
We don't have those mountaintop experiences, the mountain of transfiguration every day. God says those are few and far between. Those are moments for enlightenment.
Yep.
The grind is getting down in the valley and slugging it out.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions I want to go down. This is so cool because I just feel like that you guys are just practicing. You've practiced, I should say, and again, continue to practice. Parenting never stops. You're practicing what we tell parents and what our book says, what Base Camp says, what everything says about. It's about relationship. It's about connection. And so let me go down a couple of rabbit trails here with you. So Chase, how do you instill? Chase is a super confident kid. He's super engaging. I see him all the time. And I don't know him well, but every time I see him, he just, I've met with him a few times as he was exploring some business opportunities and things. What do you feel like you took a kid that could have been, got a Super Bowl, 3-time Super Bowl champion dad who's how tall are you?
6'6", yeah.
So 6'6", just and he's in a wheelchair, could feel so disconfident, unconfident, whatever that word is, lack of, but yet you've created a confident young man. How do you feel like, and I know some of it is what we just talked about, but specifically, what did you feel like you did to help him feel good about himself and feel good about his identity in Christ?
That his dad loved him. I told him often. Mm-hmm. I would hug him. I would, take him places where we could to talk to other guys, my teammates, to have him included, to be a part of it, to have experiences like every other kid would have. But the confidence I think that our children get from us, and I've asked my kids about this, what was it? And they said, we knew we were secure, that you loved us unconditionally. I mean, I every time I leave the house, I hug my kids. They're no longer living in the house with us.
Right.
We're empty nesters, but I hug my wife. And every time we leave, hug my wife. Love you. It's there. And it was when kids know that they are secure, when we know that our Heavenly Father loves us, when we can grasp that, that's where we get our confidence from. That's where we get our identity and our truly who we are as people from the Father.
Right.
And that we know that we are loved. And I think, again, it's not that ornate thing that you have to, it's just the little things in life. Hey, I love you. I'm proud of you.
Right.
And I read a book several years ago that had an impact on me. It was a book written by Carol Dweck called Mindset. Mm-hmm. And it talked about who's
the author?
Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K.
Mindset.
Mm-hmm. And it said there's two types of mindset, a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. Growth mindset, hey, I may not be the best at this, but I can work at it and I can improve. Fixed mindset basically says, I'm as good as I'm going to be. If I can't get it on the first time, I'm done.
Right.
We all have a tendency to be both. But they talked about this in the book is how you communicate with your kids. Mm-hmm. A fixed mindset would be, you're so smart. You're so beautiful. Right. You're so athletic. You're the best in the basketball court, whatever. Mm-hmm. But when that kid then comes up against somebody that's prettier, that's smarter, that's a better athlete, they go, what does that mean? I thought I was supposed to be the best.
Right.
Fixed mindset. But how you talk to them is, you know what? That A you got on your test, I'm so proud of how hard you worked to accomplish that.
Right.
Your basketball skills, I'm so proud every day how you practice. You just do the little things right.
You're better than you were yesterday.
You're better. It praise the work ethic.
Right.
Praise the struggle. That's the difference. And that's how I try to communicate with my kids.
Right.
Is to instill in them that, hey, you're never going to be there. That living excellence, it's a day-to-day. What can I do today to get better? How can I be my best self today?
Well, and I love this because we teach parents all the time is that parenting is a game that everyone can win. And I love this, and I want to get into Brenna in just a second.
Yeah.
But what I want to stop down on here is this. I want you to see parents that, Chad has a child with an autoimmune illness so that physically, it's totally opposite of your life. Everything physically you've tried to do, you've done and exceeded, at the top level of life. And yet you were able to take a child who physically was incapable of a lot of things and instill confidence in them. I think that applies to parents in so many ways because so often, especially in our society that we run in, moms and dads are achievers. They are doing well, and maybe, and children are just kids. I mean, sometimes they're lazy or sometimes but how do you take this kid and you instill that confidence in him? And it's just that drip process.
Exactly. And I want parents to realize that we didn't get this right. This is through a lot of trial and error. Mm-hmm. This is through a lot of mistakes that were made. But the thing about it, we would apologize to our kids. You know what, Chase, Brenna, Mom and Dad, we messed up.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. We'll correct that. And that aspect of humility is also very important. And again, it's over time. And again, we're talking 28 years of Chase's life that we've learned a lot of these lessons.
Yeah,
so,
we talk about our parenting in decades. Like the first decade was pretty sad in so many ways. And then second decade, we learned a lot, kind of started the principles that we have here. And it's almost like the third decade we started. Maybe God gave us 7 kids for that reason, because we needed to learn a lot. But let's talk about, I love, you've mentioned Brenna a lot, and she is just a delightful young lady, about to get married. Yes,
yeah.
Is that right? Yes. So that's what I was thinking, that she's engaged now. And
yes.
So, how did you, so often when parents have major issues with their child over years, as this happened, the other child feels neglected, or, like, for example, we've dealt with our kids with having 7 kids. Sometimes they've said, sometimes we didn't feel like we feel like we were, 5th on the list or whatever. And so whatever that issue is, how did y'all deal with Brenna, and how did you make time for her, especially in the early years of her life and things? So tell us about that a little bit.
We're very fortunate in the fact that I think Brenna, God created her to have a very empathetic heart, that she saw, as a young girl, the pain that Chase would go through, and a lot of the struggles that he had to live with on a day-to-day basis gave her a strong sense of empathy and a strong sense of care and wanting to help. And they played. I mean, they were like each other's best friends when they were
And they're 3 years apart.
Yeah, and they, she doted on her big brother. I mean, her big brother was her best friend when she was a little girl. But Tammy, I mean, we both, again, the same things that we did with Chase was with her, is verbally told her, we love you, physical affection, just the encouragement, concentrating on her identity, concentrating on who God created her to be, her character. And, I give a majority of the credit to my wife, because I was, doing the work thing and being home to establish chaos if I had to come home to that. But no, Tammy did a phenomenal job of just exemplifying love and care and nurturing. And, they still today have the moments, but they always come back, reconcile, and they know that they're loved.
And so is there anything you can think of as you were going through those, I guess the first decade and 2, as Brenna's getting, older, and, Chase is still, a lot of attention needs to be paid to Chase because of the doctors and everything. And I guess over time, did the doctor visits become less?
Less and less. Yeah, they did. But it was, for her, again, just nature versus nurture. She became a very independent individual, very resourceful. She, as she grew into her teens, Tammy would rely on her to kind of plan certain things. So we gave her more responsibility in certain areas that I think, I'd be curious if, talking about Brenna today, I've never really asked her, did you feel that you were neglected during this time? And I honestly think that she would say no.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it just goes to show you, parents, that it's and you guys were dealing with a very difficult issue that took a lot of time, but yet, again, it doesn't take, so often parents think it takes a lot of time. It does in some ways, but really it's a matter of what you're doing. What I hear you say is that, you just spent time with her, encouraging her, telling her who she was, telling her that she could do it, encouraging the right things. And it's amazing when parents start to do that, how kids just take off. And it's interesting, you said that she became independent. Through her, I picture that. It happened with my kids too. that as you invest in them and establish their identity, they start over those middle school and teenage years to start to do life on their own. And isn't that what we want?
That's what we want.
Yeah. Isn't that the goal?
That is the goal. And I want to say one thing, in all transparency too, that, making me out to be this great guy here, but
you are.
Don, there were so many times though that as a dad that I was home physically, but I wasn't there emotionally.
Right.
I'm either was thinking about when I was in the Cowboys, if I had a game, the next practice, the next game, what that was going to be like, or in business, that I'm home physically, but I wasn't there emotionally for Tammy, in
right.
support and or for my kids. And that's my biggest regret.
Well, and that's that type
back.
A coming out too, because you get super focused and it's very hard to go, back and forth. And home is Tammy's kind of running the home, so you're just a participant type thing, in some ways. But over time, did you feel like that you became more involved in that?
Yeah, and I think
learned?
when I learned, and where I became more. The realization of this whole process that I can't control the outcome, that, as we alluded to earlier, that I had to open up the hand, open up the kimono and say, God, you got to lead, where I became more at peace with myself and with that. And that's just the spiritual walk.
Part of that is, you guys we've been at church together for many, many years, as well as we were in school together in the private school for many years, but really church longer. And isn't that part of your process too? That every Sunday, and Chad Hennings is the guy who at the 11 o'clock service for about 50 years has been the greeter there, and so you got this 6'6" guy that you see, and you always know that everything's stable because Chad's there. Are you still doing that?
Yeah, no, we took a break after for a little while.
Well, but you did it for many years,
yeah.
And so you've been just involved in the church, just that dripping of content, into your life. Our church is a very strong church on identity and life and relationship with God. And so was that part of your change process? Of just being involved with the church and
being involved with the church and submitting to others, in your circle or in your sphere of influence, your relationships, that it's the body of Christ.
Right.
I mean, we can't just be the thumb, the right bicep. I mean, we need every other organ and every other part and limb of the body to function and to be healthy. And I know what I do well. And that's a big thing too, as parents, we need to be self-aware and totally honest and transparent with ourselves and with each other as parents. Mm-hmm. There's certain things that we need to work on always, and we have certain strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
Get your strengths stronger, limit your weaknesses. And I had to learn to do that. I'm still learning to do that.
Right.
Every day.
Yeah. Hey, as we kind of start to land the plane a little bit, I want to explore marriage. And so, so we've talked about so much about, how this helped you come to the end of your rope with God and started to learn who God is. And really, I love the idea that, I hear this a lot with physical illnesses, exploring the gamut of healing and where God fits and all that stuff. And then I love it that we, explored with Brenna, because I think so often we, it's family is all of our kids, and a lot of times these stories tend to focus on the one relationship or the one kid, but we actually have a couple kids there. And so how and even those relationship dynamics, let's talk about the marriage. So you talked about at first how it was a struggle at first, but how has your marriage evolved as you've gone through this with Chase and with Brenna too?
I think we're coming to the point now as empty nest. We've making that transition just within the last couple of years where the kids have moved out of the house. They've gotten their own homes. They're doing their own
Got to
lives.
see if you like each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, who are you?
Yeah.
And as I alluded, for us in our earlier part of our marriage, we never really had that time. We didn't have a long courtship.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't spending a lot of time together. So in essence, we're getting to know each other.
Yeah.
Again, where we're spending time and we're starting to find that, we actually like each other. No,
yeah,
just
exactly.
kidding.
I know.
You know what that is.
Well, and sounds like you're very different.
Oh, we are, but we're very much alike, but we're very different. I mean, just how we communicate, how we process information, how much information we need to make decisions. And it's, because we think about, it's always, that's why I alluded to self-awareness. We have to be very careful about that trap about, is our perception reality?
Right.
There's always two sides, two different viewpoints, and it's where you can honestly listen, not just hear, but listen to the other person's point of view to think, okay, kind of chew on it, twist it, is that right? And then be able to communicate with grace, where you're not trying to win a debate or win an argument. That's Tammy and I are both that way, where we're competitive in that regard. You see things my way, but it's like, not always my way or not always her way is the right way.
Well, we kind of think about where your marriage is now, 32 years later, in that first decade, going through it with first of all, being apart. Second, you were intense job, to say the least, and then also dealing with the Chase deal. What was that marriage like in that time? And what did you do that helped to further it versus let it go in the ditch?
Well, the marriage, it was survival. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was literally survival. We, there's no other way to basically say it. And the thing about it, we made that commitment early on that, we're sticking together. We made a commitment before God. Divorce is never an option. Yep. So we're going to have to figure this out. Yep. And we've done different, we haven't done probably enough, but we've, different devotionals, different retreats, just stimulating conversation to have those conversations to go over topics that may be difficult. Yeah. And to learn to forgive and learn to move on. And it's a continual process. Yep.
Do you feel like that that each over those seasons, like once Chase when you got into your second decade of marriage, let's say, what was different about that as you proceeded through? Because sometimes we see a lot of parents that they kind of go in the ditch in that first 5 to 10 years, and they, then they're building out of it maybe, or it continues down the path of. So if you look at kind of your marriage in that, and as you went through this issue with Chase, and as Brenda comes along and things, can you think of times that you're like, oh wow, this is this is where we broke through, or this is where I love it. Like in the first decade, it's like you're almost like, okay, we got to survive. What about in the second decade when you went through it?
I think it wasn't, we never had that aha moment. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of people have that salvation moment where they know when they accepted God. But,
right.
When I grew up in the church, it's been a gradual movement towards revelation of God. And I think our marriage was much that same way. It wasn't necessarily an aha moment where we figured it out. It's grind. And I probably should use a different adjective there. Grind. But then you look back and you take an analysis of, look at all that we've accomplished. Look at how much closer we are. Look at all the things that we've been able to do. Then you can appreciate that. Yeah. When you're in the heat of the battle, you're oblivious to it. Your view is very myopic. You got your head down. Yeah. But then when you look back, you think, wow, look at all that we've been able to do.
And that has become a common theme of this conversation is just it's just the steadiness. We talk about it, how when people go into base camp, they tend to, our membership site, they might just look at some videos and then go on. It's like really when it really works is when you keep putting that content in and letting it drip into you. The same thing happens with your actions when you're dripping, just that steady progress.
And I will say one thing, add on to that. The thing about true transformation for anybody, whether it's personal or relational, you've got to apply it. Mm-hmm. You got to do it. You got to demonstrate it. Because I know it's one thing when I read content, right, or you absorb content, you're teaching in a class. But for you, when you can actually apply it to your marriage, or when you have to teach it, that's where you really know it.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
But one of the things I talk to my kids about this is that there's going to come a time where you hear from Tammy and I about right, wrong, this is how to act, this is how you react, this is how you think through this process. But when you're away from us, you're going to have to own it.
Yeah, it's so
when
good.
you own it, that's when you truly know that you've arrived.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is you can absorb all this content, but do you own it?
Yeah. And I promise you, parents, I did not coach him to say all these things because this is everything we're teaching you, parents. As we land this plane, I just want to, there's so honestly, I am learning things about Chad and his family as we are talking here because, we've talked, but in some ways not in the depth that we're talking here as we explore, the years and the decades that happen with family. But, man, there's just, I want to kind of wrap it up with, hey, everybody can win this game. Chad and Tammy, yes, he's got a great pedigree, Air Force pilot and Super Bowl champion and all that stuff, but they're real people that had to go through some real issues and in so many ways, so many people that have been through what they have been through, their marriage is cratered, versus being healthy. Their kids have, not been the kids that Chase and Brenna are. And what I want to point out to you parents is that it's about that Chad and Tammy focused on some things that were really important. They focused on the dinner table. They were in the same church for how long? For decades. They have, done the same things over and over again. And when that happens, we see it over and over again that great families happen. Because God's in it. They've pursued their relationship with God for years and years and years. They've pursued their marriage. No big epiphany, but just steady progress. Would you say that? Am I summarizing that good?
Perfect.
Yeah. And
Perfect.
so I am so. I want to I hope this has been inspiring to you. So many of our parents are where you were at year 5, at year 8, at year 13. They've got and parents, if you're facing an issue that it may not be an autoimmune disease. It may be, or illness, it may be that, your kid has a learning disability, or it could be that, your siblings are fighting like your kids are fighting each other like crazy, and you have this relationship issue with your 13-year-old that seems like it's always going to be horrible. There's hope.
Always.
There's hope. There's hope for you, and the hope is in your identity in Christ. I look at you, Chad, and say that you've just spent your life going deeper and deeper with the Lord, and out of that comes that forgiveness you're talking about, right? I mean,
yep.
And I just think that parents, I hope this story inspires you and is encouraging to you that, hey, no matter what season you're in, there's always hope. Hope is a person. His name is Jesus, and he is there for you. And as you move your family down that path, you're going to see that hope become the realization of that hope, I guess. Where in reality, that's just where. So when, Chad, you look at today, and I guess as you look at it, 32 years later, is it worth it?
Oh, amen.
I mean,
amen.
Is it worth it? And what do you feel like when you look at your family today? What do you see and feel?
That's my legacy. It's not fighter pilot. It's not the Super Bowls. My legacy is my relationship with Tammy and my kids, and eventually my grandkids. That's what I'm spending the time and putting the time and effort. All this other stuff is periphery.
Right.
So I rejoice, and I look at. And what, for me, it brings me more joy is when you compliment my kids. Mm-hmm. They're good kids of character, kids of quality. That, to me, means more than anything else in my life.
Well, isn't it interesting, especially to moms and dads, that this is a guy who's won 3 Super Bowls. This is a guy who served his country. This is a guy, there's a lot of, when you look at accomplishments, there's a lot that you could hang your hat on. You're in the NFL for 9 years. I mean, had a great college career. I mean, there's so many things you could hang your hat on, and yet family is what comes to mind. The family is what's most important. I tell parents all the time is that, family is the best thing I've ever done in my life. And so, and it's so cool. That's why we call it Crazy Cool Family, not because we want to be cool like we're hip, because when your family's working, it's the coolest thing that ever happens other than your salvation. So,
Amen.
So again, thanks for coming.
Don, appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been awesome. And so we will now, wingmen.org.
Yep.
And is that the best place to go for men? And tell
yep.
There are small groups. Tell us a little bit about how Wingman works.
It's what it is we have small groups that get together either virtually online or face to face. And by wingman.org, it'll walk through the process. Many times men are so afraid of do I have to lead a small group? Oh my gosh, I can't. But it's not. You don't have to lead. You facilitate.
Yeah.
It's just providing a place, a location. We have resources that you can go.
So
through.
can men join a group through that?
They
as
can
well?
join a group
Yep.
if there's one in your local area. If not, there's virtual opportunities,
Yep.
and if not that, hey, we have training that can help walk you through and find another friend, and you're off and running.
So, and men, but just the relationship and the camaraderie that happens when I was just in my men's group at our circles group at our church, and we were all confessing what, the pastor challenged us, where's God leading and what can we do? And so helpful. And so, and like you say, if you lead one, facilitate one, you have to learn how to do even more, which helps you be a better. And so, again, thanks for coming in. Wingmen.org. We'll put that in the show notes as well. And so just encourage you to invite Chad's ministry into your life, into your church, and just be inspired about family. So as always, go be crazy parents, crazycoolfamily.com.